the Rotary News, upcoming Rotary News yet. Everything's still coronavirus. So, our speaker today, I don't think I should really say much to introduce him, except he is Michelle's husband, the GM of GWA, Mr. Miguel Bordallo, who would let us know on what's going on with GWA and our aquifer. So take it away, Mr. Bordallo.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Um, so I kind of had to short notice to prepare, and I understand that there was an interest in hearing about the aquifer, the Northern Guam Lens Aquifer, the NGLA, and I assumed that the interest might be revolving around the recent controversies about septic tanks and lot sizes. So I wanted to kind of focus on that and then present kind of the science, at least as I understand it. Um, and although, as Paul mentioned in his tribute to me, I am a geeky engineer with a pocket protector. I'm not a scientist that specializes in the aquifer. So when I said beg, borrow, and steal to prepare, I actually did a little bit of begging and borrowing, not so much stealing. But I'll share my screen now. I have some slides just to go through the topic and provide some of the facts. So if you bear with me for a second, I'll get this up on the screen here, and hopefully you can just confirm that you see it.
We can see it.
So as I mentioned, I did borrow some information. I did a lot of coordination with WERI, so Dr. Jensen at WERI, and also the chief engineer at Guam EPA, Captain Brian Bearden from the Public Health Service. So we collaborated in trying to get consensus among the community about that recent bill that was presented at the last legislature regarding septic tanks on the aquifer. So their information is included here along with mine from GWA. So just to state why we have an interest in the aquifer and resource protection, I think as a provider of the water service, the former PUAG focused on delivering the water. When GWA came into existence, there was there was a lot more regulatory scrutiny that was kind of resulted in GWA becoming its own entity. And so one of the first AGM positions, assistant general manager positions that was created here was for compliance and safety. And it focused on making sure we delivered quality water and it was safe. But then it also involved us regularly monitoring our wells, which of course are connected to the aquifer. So the slide that you see right now on the screen shows the northern half of Guam. And you can see all those little blue dots are drinking water wells. We have 120 wells that go down deep into the aquifer, and that draws from various basins within the aquifer. I think there are about 5 different basins within the Northern Guam Lens. And that accounts for 91% of our total production. The rest of our production is from Ugam, which is a surface water treatment plant, and from springs. But the vast majority of our water that comes out in your taps comes from these deep wells in the Northern Guam Lens. We produce about 34 million gallons a day on average, and that's about 1 billion gallons a month, which we pump out of the ground and deliver through our piping network to your homes and your businesses. So the recent concern and recent topic of concern about the aquifer has been nitrate contamination. And nitrates are an indicator for groundwater that has been impacted by either fertilizers or wastewater in our case. So we monitor all of our wells regularly for nitrates to be in compliance with Guam EPA and EPA safe drinking water regulations. There is a maximum contaminant level for nitrates, which is 10 parts per million. And that level is established by EPA based on the body of knowledge in the scientific community and lots of studies which measure the health impacts of nitrates on humans. And the levels that are set are, as I understand it, if you receive up to that level or you consume up to that level over a lifetime, then you should see no adverse health effects. So it's not like a short-term thing. It's intended to be a guide for long-term exposure. But we don't ever want to approach the maximum contaminant level, because if we do, that means we have to take a well offline until we can figure out a way to treat the well for the water. But the bigger picture is, if we're seeing it in the well at those levels, then the aquifer is contaminated to a point where it now can no longer be used without extra treatment. So the typical sources for nitrates are septic systems, which are individual sewage disposal systems, fertilizers, which you might find in farms, used on farms or in golf courses, leaky sewers, which would be my concern, and also the other utilities on the island, which include Navy and Air Force. And it is naturally occurring in mineral. It's a naturally occurring mineral, and uh, legumes or nitrogen. They have a nitrogen fixing effect in the soil that they grow in. So there was a study that was done previously which postulated that perhaps Tongan, which is so prevalent here after World War II as a reforestation um, plant that was spread on the island, and it's a bean, it's a legume, so it might be contributing to the high levels of nitrates, which I'll talk about a little later. So this is that same map where you saw all of our wells, but this shows where our sewer network is. So all of these little tan dots and yellow lines are our sewer pipes and manholes. So everywhere that you don't see that is where there is no sewer system. So you can see where all these arrows are pointing to. These are neighborhoods and developments that have residences, but they're equipped with individual disposal systems or septic systems. And so there's a whole lot that's over the northern Guam lens. Um, the the sewer system for the northern district, which comprises a lot of where the NGLA is, was built in the early 80s. And there's been a lot of development since then in portions over the aquifer that are not connected to the sewer system and rely on these septic systems to dispose of their wastewater. So what does the data tell us about nitrates in lens? So this is part of what I borrowed from Dr. Jensen and Dr. Habana, and one of their graduate students put together this, which took all the data from 146 wells. So that's all of our wells plus Air Force wells and Navy wells and any monitoring wells that they have. And they looked at all the data from 1986 to up to 2019, and which is a comprehensive set of data. And what they observed was that there was 4 different trends that they observed, and we'll go over those. So the first was increasing over the entire period. And so if you see the top part of that slide, you can see all the data points ranging from 1986 all the way to 2019. And by the slope of that line, you can see that the concentrations in that one particular well, which is M15, they're increasing, right? So if you did a linear regression, that's what you would see. Then the second trend is there was some historic increases, and then there comes a point in time where it kind of levels out. And so it counts as an increase over time up to about 2000, but then after that, it stabilized and it flattened out, but it's still at elevated levels. And then the next trend is just, very stable. We've not seen any decreases. And then the last cases, there's been a slight decrease over time. So out of those 146 wells that they looked at, the majority, I think about 58%, show the increasing levels. And it's primarily, if you look at all the different sources that I listed, could be sewers, could be septic systems, and it could be the use of fertilizers, but that's not really so prevalent. So if you look, their study also looked at where the septic systems are. So all these little red dots that you see are mapped septic systems, individual disposal systems that were constructed over the years up to 2019. And the larger dots that you see here with the different color codings, these are wells that were observed and the purple dot has a concentration of nitrates of above 10. And I told you about that maximum contaminant level of 10. So what we're worried about are the ones that are orange and red. And what we, if we get to that point, then we have to start treating the water that comes out of those wells in order to put it into our distribution system. And that can get very expensive. But in terms of the septic systems, they don't remove nitrates from the wastewater. So once you flush your toilet, it goes into your septic tank. The water that leaches out of that into the leaching field has nitrates in it, and there's no way to stop that from entering the subsurface unless you take that septic system out of service by connecting it to the sewer system. So that presents a challenge for GWA in order to protect the water resource and get rid of all these septic systems. We're going to have to build out the sewer system, which also, as you can imagine, comes with a very expensive cost. So the other alternative is to use an advanced individual disposal system. So it's kind of like a septic system, but there's additional treatment, and it recirculates air, and it can take the nitrates and turn them into airborne nitrogen, which then gets vented into the atmosphere, but it takes it out of the wastewater and therefore reduces the impact to the groundwater. So in the recent bill that was passed, GWA was supporting that bill to eliminate loopholes on existing development regulations that would allow for, that do allow currently for septic systems to be installed on quarter-acre lots above the aquifer. And the opposition that was raised to that said, well, they were saying there's studies that show that the source of nitrates in the aquifer is tongue and tongue, and it's not septic systems and it's not anything else. And so WERI did a deep dive into that and discovered that it was one of their own reports where this was first mentioned. And you can see here that there was a high background level of 9 milligrams per liter, they're saying, of nitrates. And they postulate here that there's a strong suggestion that legumes are the major contributor to the nitrate content in limestone groundwaters. Well, when this came up and it became an issue with that legislation, WERI took a closer look at the source data for this study, which was done in 1976, and they found that it was drilling logs and samples that were taken when wells were being put in the ground, but there was a conversion factor of 4.27 that needed to be applied to this number in order to get it to the same analyte that we measure for now, and which is the subject of WERI's recent study on nitrates. So if you apply that factor, that 4.427 conversion factor, the high background level of 9 drops in the corrected version to about 2 parts per million, which is what the background level should be. So the argument or the theory that tongue was the source of high nitrates is just total nonsense, and it's been debunked based on a good hard look at the source data that was used for that statement. So what WERI concluded was that, as I mentioned, more than half of all the wells show a historic record of increase in nitrates, and the sources are both leaking sewer lines and conventional septic tanks that are still in use, and that the only way to eliminate the nitrates that are coming from these septic tank systems are to stop their use, connect those to the sewer system, and prohibit further septic tanks from being constructed. So do we need any more information than what we're seeing in WERI's study? Well, we have an additional study that was done in Saipan by Captain Bearden, who is now the chief engineer at Guam EPA. And they took a look at lots of different areas in Saipan and found that there was a strong correlation between nitrates and unsewered developments. And they were especially compounded by the fact that there are very thin soils over the limestone. So not a lot of breakdown of any nitrates in that soil layer because it's so thin. And so you could see here, this is one of the results of that study. This is the Cagman area. So all of this development is unsewered development, very dense. So akin to putting septic tanks on quarter-acre lots over the northern Guam lands. And you can see that the wells here were at 50% of the maximum contaminant level for nitrates in these samples. So these wells here in these red spots. and they correlate very well to where the unsewered subdivision was located. So there's a case study that points out, there isn't a whole lot of more data that you need to recognize that the septic tanks are having an effect on the groundwater. And the NGLA is a sole source aquifer. It's the only aquifer we have. That's why we're so worried about saltwater intrusion and other contaminants, because once we ruin it, there is no going back. It takes a long time for it to repair itself. And so we want as much as possible to avoid that by taking prudent steps now to avoid impacts like nitrates would have long-term on our aquifer. So what is a prudent course of action? Well, for us, we want to focus on rehabilitating our sewer lines, because a lot of the infrastructure that we have in the ground was inherited. It's been put in over years and years and years, and there's been very little emphasis on regular replacements. Anybody who owns a building or runs a business knows that if you have equipment, it has a certain lifespan, and that you have to plan, put away a certain amount of money every year, so that if it only lives 10 years, in 10 years, you got to make a big capital investment to replace it. That type of logic hasn't really been prevalent at GWA before or at PUAG, but it is now. And that's why we have these 5-year capital improvement programs where we're looking at regular replacements, and rehabilitating our sewer lines is part of that CIP, and that's part of what we're doing now. We also want to expand the sewer systems to connect existing homes that are on septic tanks onto the sewer system, so that we're not leaching that water into the NGLA. When we do that, we'll prioritize areas that are near our production wells and over the high yield parts of the northern Guam lens. Another prudent course of action, which is why we sponsored the previous legislation, was to eliminate loopholes to existing development regulations that allow for septic tanks on smaller lots. And that was the parental subdivision exception in the current law. So the existing regulations kind of protect the northern Guam lens by saying, if you're going to put in a septic tank, you have to do it on a size that's at least a half acre, to make sure that you don't have a large concentration of these septic tanks leaching the nitrates into the groundwater. Well, there's one exception to that, and that is parental subdivisions. And so the proposed legislation just eliminated that one exception and made a level playing field for everybody to follow in developing real estate on Guam. The other thing that was proposed, and is a prudent course of action, is to update Guam EPA's regulations to allow for the use of advanced individual disposal systems. So there is an alternative to septic systems, a modern alternative. It's pre-manufactured. It's in fact, I think, easier to construct. You dig a hole, you drop it in the ground, you plumb it up. And it does have an additional requirement where it does have a ventilator, a blower, to circulate the air and then pull the nitrates out as nitrogen and vent it into the atmosphere. So it does require more maintenance, but there's nothing, it's not too high of a cost to ask for protecting the water resource. And then, of course, prohibit the use of any further use of septic systems. The ones that are in the ground now, we should maintain, but we should try to phase them out and don't allow any new ones to be built if there is a more advanced alternative that can be used to protect the water resource. So what are we doing specifically to address this? Well, we just completed one of our largest sewer line rehab projects. We finished it in May of last year, and it was 9 miles of major interceptor line from Anderson Air Force Base all the way along to Potts Junction, down Route 3 to the Northern District Treatment Plant. And that was 9 miles of pipe, and we rehabilitated it using what's called cured in place pipe. So this is in this photo, you can see this is a liner that's being slipped inside of the existing pipe. And then we use compressed air to blow it up. And then we send in a UV light train that goes through, and it activates the resins that are in that liner. So we blow it up to expand to the pipe, and the UV light hardens it, and then it becomes like a brand new pipe. So we've done this over that 9 miles, and then there are, of course, certain areas that we needed to do point repairs or spot repairs in order to make sure the liner went through unobstructed. So that was a very large project. It was a $30 million project. We finished $4 million under budget. So we had a little left over to apply to other projects. We also are launching a septic tank elimination program. It's in our 5-year CIP and it's ambitious. We propose to install 5,000 linear feet of new sewer line every year. And we're going to start with areas that are around our existing production wells and that are high priority areas over the northern Guam lands. As I mentioned, that's currently funded. As long as we can maintain our revenues and our finance plans, we should be able to meet these goals. With the current pandemic, that's a little harder to fathom at the moment, and we're doing some readjusting, but I can update you on that later. One other thing we're doing is we are helping WERI by expanding their ability to monitor the aquifer. So there's two pictures, two images on this. And the one on the left is the existing monitoring well system that they use to check the health of the aquifer. So you can see these dotted lines here are the different basins within the northern Guam lens. And we draw primarily from this basin here. And the Air Force draws from this basin up here. But there are like 5 different basins here. Or 6 different basins here. And this is the existing infrastructure. On the right, you'll see all of these blue balloons that we're adding. This is 7 additional monitoring wells that GWA is installing. And you'll notice that we're putting several in portions of the aquifer, the basins in the aquifer that WERI does not currently have a whole lot of data. So we're expanding the system, and then other existing ones, we're rehabilitating 12 of those monitoring wells. And we're striking up an agreement with the Department of Defense to handle the future sustainment and maintenance of those wells by splitting the ones that are on DOD property and the ones that are outside the fence, so to speak. We will take responsibility for and take care of the long-term maintenance. So we want to expand, we want to get more data on the aquifer, the portions of the aquifer that we don't currently have data on, and monitor it, watch it, and inform us so we make proper decisions on where to put new wells perhaps, or when to stop pumping from existing wells because they're showing signs of contamination. So just to sum up, the bill that was put out there met a lot of public resistance, and I wanted to clarify a few things because GWA came out in support of that bill, and we did a lot of work trying to build consensus with the people that were objecting to it, mostly the real estate community. And we supported it because it closed the loophole that we felt shouldn't have been there for parental subdivisions. It did not eliminate parental subdivisions or the ability to create parental subdivisions, but it just eliminated the loophole that allowed septic tanks to be constructed where everybody else with that size lot would not be allowed to construct. So we also supported in our testimony that advanced treatment systems to replace septic tanks on these parental subdivisions should be allowed. And in fact, we worked with EPA to come to consensus on a streamlined permitting process where as long as they meet national standards for individual disposal systems, which already exist and define the performance, if they're listed, then doesn't matter who the manufacturer is, EPA would accept it as long as it had that listing. And the existing permit system that's in place for septic tanks can be modified slightly to use this. And if it's listed, it actually makes the permitting process a whole lot easier. So we were in support of that. And as I mentioned, both EPA and WERI worked with us to what we come up with was what we thought was a workable solution for that, the proposed legislation, and it died in committee and never got out of committee. But we still think it's important to move forward. And so we're still going to work with Guam EPA to try and get them to update their regulations to include these advanced treatment systems so that they are available, and then we don't have to put in any new septic systems while we push forward with GWA's infrastructure and trying to rehabilitate that and expand our sewer system so that we can connect more existing homes to the sewer system. So that's kind of wraps up my discussion on that topic, and I take any questions that anyone might have.
Questions? Anyone? I'll go first. What is the the difference in cost in these advanced septic systems? You know, is it like a
So there's a couple of different um, places where it's different. Septic systems that are permitted now are typically constructed out of CMU and then plastered, and they're not very well constructed, and they're not very watertight. But they're, because it's CMU, it's readily available, it's cheaper. The advanced systems are pre-manufactured. They're like fiberglass basins that you can just drop in. So they are very reasonably priced in the States because they've been in use there longer, across the nation. So there's lots of different manufacturers who make these. It's just initially for Guam, until there are enough suppliers, it might be a little more expensive. I've heard estimates on a cost premium of like 15 to 20% over existing septic tank construction. Um, so we think that's fairly reasonable, and it would likely, that premium would go down over time as there were more vendors of that type of system available on Guam.
You think there would be use, like GPA has the Energy Sense program, maybe if there's a homeowner that is going to put a septic system in, where you could provide a one-time rebate, yeah, to kind of encourage them. Just a thought.
So with the demand side management on the power side, GPA still gets revenue from those customers, right? It helps them by giving them the rebate and putting in more efficient equipment. It helps them manage how much they have to produce. In this case, they're not sending us anything. We're not charging them anything. So there isn't really the mechanism to give them a rebate on the wastewater side. But I suppose, on the water side, there might be a means to do that, but it isn't very direct. So I'm not sure we would be the person to provide a rebate. But I would suggest that Guam EPA should waive all the permitting fees for these things. I'll ask Walter.
I noticed just near my office on East Sunset Boulevard, on the map that you had, there's a lot of red going along. Is that in the bottom of the cliff? Because I know we have sewer up on top of the cliff.
Let me see that slide again.
And I don't eat that many legumes, so the nitrate level in my excrement shouldn't be that high.
I think that's on the bottom. I don't know. It doesn't. Sorry, Paul. I can see the runway on that map, but I don't see like aerial images. So it's hard to coordinate where that would be.
Yeah, those are septic systems, right? The red ones there.
The red ones were septic systems.
Yeah, I think all the cliffside homes up on top at least are definitely sewer connected.
Yeah, it looks to be just below in the Tamooning area. I guess behind the Pizza Hut, that area back there. Maybe
the Tim Brady's dental office.
Right. Sorry, Bev.
I have a quick question, Miguel, on the converting the solid to air. Two questions. I'm assuming it's odorless or near odorless because nitrate doesn't have a smell or taste, correct? But so it would be more beneficial, but is there like a concentrated amount in the air that could be bad for neighborhoods?
No, I mean, you're releasing it as nitrogen. If I'm not mistaken, the majority of in air and all the elements that comprise it, nitrogen is the majority. So
Right.
I don't think that in the amounts that we're talking about, there would be any adverse effect.
Every home already has sewer vents on the roof, right? Where you have untreated, smelly stuff going up, and it's not really an issue, I think.
And a match and a candle.
There you go.
Okay.
Is there any impact with all the clearing, land clearing up north? Like you're going up NCS road and you see tens of acres that are cleared and jungle's gone and the gravel put down. Does that affect what gets, I guess, any leakage into the aquifer since there's a less layer of dirt and jungle to filter?
So I think not on the face of it. I think where the concern is, and I know that Dr. Jensen and EPA maintain close coordination on this, is where you have sinkholes, for lack of a better description. There are soft spots, I guess, in the limestone where there are natural depressions, and they become kind of a expressway into the aquifer. They can become an expressway into the aquifer. So over the years, stormwater collects in these things, and then just on that, based on that pressure, create solution channels through the karst limestone geology, and that over the years it creates a channel where it's a path of least resistance into the aquifer. So it isn't so much that having less soil there or having less vegetation there causes the concern, but when you expose, put in these drainage systems, there's more runoff, and you expose these depressions, which could be kind of superconductors down to the aquifer, and you don't have any contaminant that gets introduced to the surface now has a potential fast track into the aquifer. So you want to make sure you put in protective measures in your stormwater disposal system. So the clearing in and of itself probably doesn't have an impact. Percolation is probably the same, but where you get a lot of silt that gets focused, and put down these sinkholes, that could be problematic, and any contaminants that would carry.
Of course, you're removing a lot of wild pigs that are running around shitting in the woods also.
Yeah. So, if it percolates as rainwater normally does, and it doesn't go through those expressways, then the limestone does a pretty good job of filtering things out, but apparently not the nitrates. It kind of goes straight down.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions?
So what's the status on this bill? It was kind of put on hold. It wasn't passed in the last legislature, right?
That's right. And the sponsor of the bill, Senator Biscoe-Lee, did not run for re-election. She's not in the current legislature. So, I think the proponents of it, at least from my perspective, utility and Guam EPA and maybe WERI, have to look for a new champion to reintroduce the bill. And we're, at the end of it, I thought we got pretty good consensus, even from the real estate community, at least certain members of the real estate community, who were okay with the modifications made and having an alternative to parental subdivisions, but they wanted to see it happen, lay out a certain way. So they didn't want the regulations to go into effect until, or the ban on septic systems to go into effect until Guam EPA updated their regulations. And then they wanted huge fines or imprisonment for the administrator if he didn't get it done within a certain amount of time.
Hi, Miguel. Aside from nitrates, any other hazardous material is of GWA's concern? Great
question, Alvin. So you probably have all heard about PFAS. That's an upcoming contaminant of concern. We already have it in some of our wells. We have 2 wells that we shut down and are still shut down because we haven't built the treatment system for that yet, but the design is nearly complete, so we will be putting that out to bid. That is one contaminant of concern. We do have the upcoming unregulated contaminant monitoring that EPA requires us to do. It's once every 3 years, I think. So we have a new round coming up, and we'll be preparing to do that, and that should identify potential contaminants of concern. But I mentioned earlier with the nitrates, the maximum contaminant level, the regulation is set only after there's a sufficient body of knowledge regarding the impacts of those contaminants of concern to come up with a recommendation. They're just starting to get to that level with PFAS. And so we anticipate with the change in administration that we might see before the end of this year, a regulation, a maximum contaminant level introduced for PFAS compounds. The ones that we're looking at with this new round of unregulated contaminant monitoring, we likely will not see regulations on that for another few years.
Thank you, Miguel.
Any other questions?
Just a quick question on that septic tank adoption, where, you know, like you said, the newer technology does a better job of it and so forth, but there's been a sort of a holdback from the greedy developers of real estate. I'm just kidding, Bev. What's the main like refusal? It's better for you and it's better for the environment, but is it just because it's 10 times the cost, or what is the resistance on it?
You know, honestly, I thought a lot of the feedback was not a lot of the initial feedback was not well-founded. Like they brought up the tongue-in-tongue issue, and that's the real cause. And why are you putting the onus on these poor parental subdivision owners to fix the problems that, you know, are being caused by a plant? So after some discussions and, you know, the logic and the evidence that I showed you that, you know, the numbers are the numbers, the current data that we're using is the right data, and that there's really no disputing it. That argument went away, but then it became more of an issue of property rights and what's the basis for the quarter acre? You know, where's the scientific study behind that? You should do a study first. Well, we agree that that probably needs to be looked at. We're not questioning the acre or the half acre, and we're not proposing any changes to that. All we're saying is eliminate the exception. But then what is the alternative? Well, then here's the alternative. You can use these advanced treatment systems. They're available. Well, you know, you got all these new permits that you have to get to do it. No, all you got to do is show that it meets a recognized US standard that is already in existence. And here's a list of 37 manufacturers that already provide this type of unit that meets these standards. If it's on this list, EPA will permit it. And so that argument went away. So it took a lot of convincing, but at the end of it, I think it was, they didn't want additional regulation. They didn't feel that the government should be sticking it to individual landowners. And how come GWA is not doing enough to take care of this problem? So that was, I guess, the selfish reason why I put in some of the slides there, is to show, well, we're doing what we can. We're doing our part, but we don't control the septic tank systems and the development regs. We only control what we can in terms of building permits when we review that. But you know, we think it's my role is to provide the service. I'm not really a regulator, but I have a vested interest in protecting the resource, perhaps more so than you know, the developers think about. Maybe they don't think about it, but I have to think about it. And since I took this job, it's become more of a priority to me than it was before I took the job.
Bev, you have a question?
Yes,
Comment?
I do. Question, and I'm not sure if Miguel, I'm not sure if you covered this. Let it just be known that I'm a real estate agent that agrees with you. I really feel that we need to protect our northern aquifer. And I don't know if this was brought up earlier because I was doing other things while I was listening. Anyway, did you discuss about the percolation rates for Guam? Because don't we have a very, very fast percolation rate compared to like other locations, you know, faster than normal? And that's another concern for contamination of our northern aquifer.
Yeah, I think I only touched on it indirectly, but you're right. You know, when people talk about aquifers, for example, in Florida or in other jurisdictions where the subsurface conditions are more homogeneous and more uniform, there's a different sort of concern. But Bev's right. For limestone, for karst limestone geology like we have, as I mentioned, there's the limestone is very porous and there's good percolation rates through that. But there are these solution channels, these expressways that, you know, lead directly to the aquifer. And so that is a concern, and it makes it even more critical that we pay attention to what gets put on the surface and where it gets put into the surface. And one of the things not a lot of people are aware of, that since I took the job, I'm aware of, is that, you know, there's a lot of illegal dumping that goes on. Most people don't see it, but a lot of our wells are located on coral utility roads, and there's only a power line, and there's no other development around it. And so, you know, people will drive their trucks along that road and just toss out junk, right? And so it ends up right near our well sites, and that to me is kind of stupid. Why would you do that, right? Maybe people don't know that this is a production well. But what worries me more is the sinkholes that I've described are typically where people have, you know, used, hey, there's a hole in the ground, let's fill it up. So throw their old tires in or whatever. So that type of activity, I'm sure, goes on. It doesn't necessarily show up because nobody can, you know, see it if it's in the jungle. But you know, that's another thing to be concerned about, and it relates to the expressways that are above the northern Guam lands.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Paul, stop dumping your tires in the sinkholes.
I have to just make a comment that, you know, Miguel, I drive around all the time, and the worst cases of illegal dumping is up north, especially around the little side roads off of Route 3. It's really horrible up there. My husband and I have taken hikes around the area, and it's just terrible. Like if you even hike around near the Two Lovers Point area, those little side roads and so forth, you'll find all that illegal dumping back there. It's terrible.
Did I see that Saipan map correctly? They have a pretty bad, I mean, high concentrate of problems.
Well, they do. That was one area. The study that I took, that Captain Bearden study that I took that slide from, went through about 5 or 6 different areas, and maybe 3 or 4 of them focused on livestock and fertilizers, that kind of thing, where the farms were. There were only 2 areas where the subdivisions, unsewered subdivisions, created a big problem. One was Cagman, the other one was Coblerville. And I didn't want to clutter the slides, so I only showed one. But they do have a problem with the nitrates. As you know, they also have a problem with chlorides. They have saltier water than we do, and that's something that we're very, very cognizant of. And we want to make sure that we're not over pumping our wells. That's another reason why we collect this data. We share it with WERI. You know, one of the bigger problems I see is that WERI runs these programs, but they depend on legislative appropriations to fund the program. And for years, they've been shortchanged. This is the budget we need in order to carry out the mandate of the legislation that created these programs. And the legislature gives them less than that. And so they're always, you know, struggling to meet the mandate. So GWA has tried to be as supportive of WERI as possible, where we feel that they have expertise that will help us in the particular project we're undertaking. We provide funding for them for their assistance. That's the reason why we are putting in these 7 new wells and rehabilitating the other 12 and taking ownership of what we can in order to maintain them, because if we don't maintain it, no one else is going to do it. And for us, it's the data that they provide and the scientific advice that they provide is critical to us properly managing the resource. But the legislature doesn't use the product of their programs the same way we do. So, you know, their funding is a big problem. And if there isn't a solution that's put into place to resolve that, it's going to be increasingly difficult for them to deal with all the different contaminants that they're going to have to monitor for and track and, you know, provide scientific guidance on how to deal with.
Cool. If there's no other questions, we can go ahead and call the meeting. It's already 1 o'clock. We've held our guest speaker for about an hour. You know, Miguel, I want to thank you for taking time to help us out today, educate us, and on a short notice. It's one of those few topics that we get that actually affects all of us. So Thanks for that.
I'm happy to do it, and also happy that I get a chance, even if you guys are only this big, to see you all. It's nice to see you all again.
If you want to buy your wife some local honey, you know where my office is, so I'll give you the Rotary discount.
Yes, that's right.
I'm
Miguel,
sorry,
yes,
We'll be
Michelle's
right there.
Okay,
I'm
Miguel
charging
is
That's
Michelle's
a
honey.
$5 fine for Paul Pack beer.
It's
Yeah,
worth
shoot.
it.
The fine's more than the discount. All right.
Well, just, and I'll pay the fine, but we did, last year we won in a blind taste testing contest, you can call it, in the States, San Francisco, Good Food Foundation. And we were a award winner for best tasting honey they had. So you can only mail that in, your honey or your product, once every 3 years. So what if you only have one product? So we also make a creamed honey, which is the same honey crystallized. And just this past Saturday, we're notified that our creamed honey also is a winner in the 2021 Good Food Award. So this is our Guam honey. I can't take all the credit. Sorry.
Is that the kind with the Guamanian cannabis in it? Is that?
No,
Or
that's
was that
not the one. No,
That was a different. That was a different Rotarian, right?
that's right.
Hey, Paul, it must be all that tang that the bees eat.
Oh, the legumes, yes.
The legumes.
Oh, look,
Oh, look,
past
Phil's-
President Phil is holding one of our bottles. That was last year's winner.
Yeah. Well,
Okay,
I
well,
can
thanks for
endorse
letting me
your
pump my
your
product.
creamy bee. Creamy bee is good. I like it.
Good to see you all. Thanks, Miguel. Thanks for doing such a great job up there.
That was a
Getting
great
brownie points.
Thank you.
Brownie points with the missus. So thank you very much. And Paul, that's a fine and also a smile box. So just text Jake how much your smile box is going to be. Other than that, fellow Rotarians, I'll see you all next week.
On.
Thanks, Miguel. Bye.
Bye. See you later.